He stood before 100 people, his face flushed red, gasping for air, clutching his chest. And then, with a horrifying sound, he emptied the entire contents of his stomach right in front of the guardsman. The crowd erupted. Some recoiled in disgust, while others instinctively grabbed their phones, recording the moment. But the worst part came just a second later. The guardsman, motionless like a statue, suddenly spoke. His words rang out like a death sentence. And what he said made that tourist age before our eyes. But let's start from the very beginning. A cold London evening. The damp air was thick with the scent of old stone streets, car exhaust, and the rich aroma of hot coffee brewed by street vendors. Tourists bustled along the pavement in front of Buckingham Palace, snapping selfies, yawning from exhaustion, and chatting about the landmarks. But among the chaos, one man stood out. A heavy-set man in his 50s, clearly American, staggered through the crowd like a ship caught in a storm. He wore a bright orange jacket, far too thin for the weather, but he didn't seem to care about the cold. A crumpled baseball cap with an American flag sat askew on his head, with unkempt grayish hair poking out from beneath it. His greasy, worn-out jeans completed his mismatched outfit. In one hand he clutched a beer can, while the other swung wildly, nearly hitting passers-by. His name was Jim, a textbook American tourist, one who always felt in charge no matter what country he was in. And if he had enough alcohol in his system, his confidence doubled. Jim marched through the streets, shaking his head, scrutinizing the buildings like he was searching for something worthy of his attention. People veered away from him, but Jim was oblivious. Then his eyes locked on to an unmoving figure in red. Encounter with the guardsman. In front of Jim, standing as still as if carved from stone, was a young British guardsman. His pale skin looked even more ghostly beneath the shadow of his massive bearskin hat, which gave him an ominous, almost arrogant appearance. His crimson uniform, perfectly pressed trousers, and impeccably polished boots made him the embodiment of British discipline and composure. The guardsman stared straight ahead, unbothered by the chaos around him. The noisy crowd, the flashes of cameras, the drunken hollers of tourists, none of it mattered. But Jim wasn't Jim if he didn't think he could break this wooden soldier. "Hey, buddy!" he shouted, swaying forward, nearly spilling his beer onto the pavement. No reaction. Jim smirked. "You even alive?" The guardsman didn't flinch, and that's when Jim had a brilliant idea. A gift for the guardsman. Jim's eyes sparkled like a child who just thought of the perfect prank. "I'm gonna give you a balloon." The crowd froze, then erupted in laughter. "Are you serious?" "No way. This is gonna be gold." "Go on, Jim. Make his day." Fueled by alcohol and attention, Jim dug into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled latex balloon. His fingers trembled slightly, but his determination was rock solid. He brought the balloon to his lips and started to blow. His cheeks puffed up, his face turned red, and he put on an exaggerated look of extreme concentration, as if he was performing a sacred ritual. The crowd exploded with laughter. Drunken tourists patted him on the back, cheering him on, but the guardsman remained motionless, standing unshaken, as if he were part of the palace itself. But Jim wasn't giving up that easily. The crowd grew livelier. Tourists who had been casually passing by Buckingham Palace now stopped to watch the bizarre showdown between the drunken American and the silent British sentinel. Laughter, encouragement, and the glow of phone screens filled the air. "Take the gift, buddy." Soaking up the attention, Jim doubled down. He bounced around the guardsman, waving his arms, his expression becoming more ridiculous with each exaggerated movement. "Come on, man. You gotta take my gift, right?" "Dude, it's just a balloon. What, you don't like gifts?" Nothing. The guardsman didn't move. Jim shook his head, grinned, and decided to push his luck further. He leaned in and tried to place the balloon in the guardsman's hand, but the British soldier was trained to ignore provocations. His fingers remained clenched, his gaze never wavered, as if he didn't even register the act. The crowd held its breath. "Ooh, he's not even flinching," someone whispered in admiration. "Dude, he's ignoring you harder than your ex," another shouted, sending a wave of laughter through the crowd. But Jim wasn't done. First failure. "Come on, man, don't be so boring," Jim grumbled, bringing the balloon back to his lips. This time he blew with all his might. The thin latex stretched as he puffed out his cheeks, his face turning redder, his breath short from beer and exertion. The crowd was dying of laughter, waiting for the moment when the guardsman would finally crack. But instead, the balloon broke first. Just as it reached full inflation, Jim exhaled too forcefully, and the balloon whipped back with a loud, pitiful squeal, smacking him right in the face. Then it fell limply to the ground, deflating like a dying fish. The crowd lost it. "Ha ha ha ha! You can't even blow up a balloon, Jim. Dude, this is pathetic. The guardsman hasn't moved, but you're already falling apart." Jim's face burned, but now not from effort, from humiliation. His pride had taken a hit. He cursed, wiped his nose on his sleeve, and staggered slightly as he dug into his pocket. "Now I'm really gonna do it." "All right, that's it," he grumbled, pulling out a new balloon. His eyes burned with drunken determination, his lips curling into a defiant grin. This wasn't just a drunken joke anymore. This was a battle. The crowd leaned in, holding their breath. Jim brought the balloon to his lips again and began blowing. Harder. His cheeks ballooned, veins bulged on his forehead, and the beer in his other hand splashed onto his sleeve. He was going all in, but no one expected what was about to happen next. The balloon grew larger and larger. Jim, gritting his teeth, forced out one last gasp of air into the rubbery surface, his eyes bloodshot from the strain. His cheeks pulsed, his face turned an unnatural shade of red. The crowd wasn't laughing as loudly now. They were watching with tense anticipation. The balloon was on the verge of bursting. Jim trembled from the effort, and then... A deep, sickening sound ripped through the air, a violent cough, so raw and broken it sounded like something inside him had snapped. Jim clutched his throat, his body lurching forward as if he had just taken a hit to the chest. The crowd fell silent. "Hey, dude, you okay?" someone muttered. But Jim couldn't answer. His face shifted colors, from red to purple, then to a pale, sickly green. He tried to inhale, but all that came out was a painful wheeze. His eyes bulged, his hands clawed at his chest, his body swayed dangerously. The crowd wasn't laughing anymore. "Oh my God, he's actually sick. Dude, should we help him?" But it was too late. Jim gurgled, doubled over, and with a horrible, guttural retch, he unleashed the full contents of his stomach onto the pavement. A nightmare on the cobblestones. It happened too fast. The mess, a disgusting blend of half-digested food and beer, splattered across the pavement right in front of the guardsman. Yellow-brown chunks, slimy, unprocessed bits of God knows what, a sticky, viscous puddle, all of it spread out, dangerously close to the guardsman's polished black boots. The crowd erupted. "Oh, hell no! Dude, that's so gross! Why am I even watching this?" Some turned away in horror. Others covered their mouths, eyes wide with disgust. A few panicked tourists stumbled back, trying to escape the scene. But some couldn't look away. "Get this on camera, bro. Record it." One guy was crying with laughter, barely holding his phone steady. I'm posting this on TikTok. Another tourist, a pale guy in a hoodie, stepped in closer, angling his phone down for a close-up shot of the foul-smelling disaster. And in the middle of all the chaos, there he stood, the guardsman. The guardsman's unshakable composure. He didn't flinch, didn't take a step back, didn't even blink, not when the vomit splattered inches from his boots. Not when the rancid stench of acid, beer, and street food filled the air. Not when the crowd screamed in revulsion. He was unmoved, a statue, a monument of British discipline. Jim? Jim was not. Jim collapsed onto his knees, clutching his chest, gasping for breath. His head spun, his stomach twisted, and his face turned ghostly pale. He stared at the mess on the cobblestones, his entire body trembling. It was like he had aged 10 years in an instant. Gah. He tried to speak, but all that came out was a weak, pathetic sound. The crowd wasn't laughing with him anymore. They were laughing at him. He wasn't the star of the show. He was the sad punchline. And then, the one thing happened that no one in the crowd expected. The air froze. The chatter died down. The laughter faded. Jim lifted his head slowly. His face was pale, his eyes wide with panic. The alcohol wasn't fun anymore. He now felt every ounce of his own stupidity. He tried to catch his breath, but his lungs felt empty. His throat burned, his stomach clenched with deep, unbearable shame. And the crowd waited. And then, a voice rang out, a voice that no one expected to hear. "Sir, you are embarrassing yourself. Leave now." Cold, clear, emotionless. The guardsman had spoken. Shock in the crowd. It was like a lightning strike.
The crowd exploded. Some covered their mouths in shock. Some broke into uncontrollable laughter. One guy literally dropped to his knees, slapping the pavement, unable to breathe from laughing so hard. Holy shit, he talked. Dude, he just destroyed you. That's game over. He wins. The guardsman. The one man who wasn't supposed to speak. The one man who was trained to remain silent under any circumstance. The one man who had endured the entire ordeal without moving a muscle, had just ended Jim's entire existence with one brutal sentence. Jim stood paralyzed. Nothing. His lips trembled, but no words came out. The crowd wasn't laughing with him anymore. They were laughing at him. His face flushed red, then drained white, then settled into a dull, lifeless gray. It hit him all at once. He had lost. He had lost completely. Time to leave. His body felt twice as heavy. He hung his head, his shoulders slumped, and he began to shuffle away. The crowd watched his every step. Damn, that was brutal. I'd change countries if that were me. He didn't even say anything back. Jim knew. He knew the video was already going viral. And sure enough, phones lit up the pavement as people uploaded the footage. On one screen, the title of the already trending video appeared. A drunk tourist tried to give a guardsman a balloon, but aged 10 years instead. The crowd laughed. The guardsman remained perfectly still, as if nothing had happened. The end.